Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live today on Wednesday afternoon. Today is September 4th, and we are going to be breaking down some of the contract developments in the NFL that have taken place within the past 24 hours. We are now at this point just over 24 hours away from kickoff of the 2024 NFL season, and teams are making their last-minute cram moves to get under the deadline and head into the season with a strong start. So that includes yesterday's contract extension that was handed out to Pat Surtain, where he becomes the highest-paid defensive back in NFL history. So we will be breaking down that deal along with the contract extensions handed out to 49ers offensive tackle Trent Williams to finally end the holdout, and additionally a surprise move for another veteran in Cameron Hayward, who got a new contract extension with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we're going to be diving into all of those. Additionally, we'll talk about Stephon Diggs, who is now with the Houston Texans after forcing his way out of Buffalo. He was named a team captain for Houston, and he also additionally did an interview with GQ Sports where he had some interesting comments about his previous destinations in Minnesota and Buffalo. So we'll talk about that. We will also give my personal takeaways from this year's Hard Knocks, which followed the Chicago Bears. So I will share that. And then finally, we are going to react to the new college football AP polls that just released yesterday. We'll talk about the key movements, both in a positive and a negative light. But before we get to everything, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts and questions on the latest happenings in sports. We want to hear what you have to say. And if you really want to make sure that your comments stand out, you can use the Super Chat button that is now available on YouTube to click on the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat, which will guarantee that your message gets on air, and it is also a very helpful way for us here at the GSMC Sports Network in helping us continue to bring you entertaining sports content. So anything would be greatly appreciated there. You can additionally use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, to do the same thing. And again, anything would be very greatly appreciated there. We're starting off with the news that the Denver Broncos have signed cornerback Pat Surtain to a record-breaking contract. He becomes the highest paid defensive back in NFL history. And Surtain, it feels like, has sort of flown under the radar a little bit since he was drafted in 2021 because of the fact that the Broncos as a whole haven't been a great team. That defense especially has not been incredible either, but that is sort of covering up the fact that Surtain has been one of the best cornerbacks really since the moment that he stepped into the league two seasons ago now. In 2022, he was selected to the AP first team, All-Pro first team, and he is coming off of back-to-back Pro Bowl seasons. So the Broncos get in early here to make sure that they can lock him down for the foreseeable future. A 4-year deal worth $96 million, $77.5 million in guaranteed money. And moving forward, he should be somebody that they are going to hope to continue to build around. He is going to be making $24 million in average annual value, which surpasses Jair Alexander as the highest paid cornerback in the league. And like I mentioned, the Broncos defense being not spectacular these past couple years has sort of covered up the fact that Surtain has been elite. And you have a lot of young cornerbacks that have really been coming onto the scene these past couple years. Sauce Gardner, obviously, has been tremendous from day one, that people just sort of slotted him into that number one spot, which I'm not saying is wrong entirely, but that's also sort of just, I don't know how all of these people just sort of leapfrogged Pat Surtain when he is just as young and exciting. He's still just 24 years old and has played 3 years in the NFL. And he has just consistently been getting results. Now, again, the fact that the Broncos aren't that good definitely does disguise the level of success personally that he's been having. But I think this is a great investment for the Broncos. Like I mentioned, still just 24 years old. By the time that this contract expires following the 2029 season, he won't even be 30 years old yet. And typically, I don't love, spending big on cornerbacks for the long-term future, because I do think that cornerback is a position where we have seen historically drop-offs tend to kick in a little bit sooner than some other positions. It's a position that is very reliant on athleticism, considering the fact that you have to mirror these up-and-coming star wide receivers and do it basically all in reverse while backpedaling. So it is a position that I do think doesn't always age perfectly, but that being said, I find it hard to believe that Surtain, by the time that this contract expires, is going to be a negative deal for the Broncos. And I think that overall, adding 4 years to what is currently on his deal is probably the perfect timeline, because again, Surtain, he will be 29 years old coming off of that contract. He'll probably, as long as he is still a prevalent force in the NFL, be able to cash out one more time headed into his 30s. And, from there, again, it can be a little bit of a crapshoot in terms of how players at cornerback end up developing long term. But again, I think for the Broncos, there were some rumors about the idea that they could look to trade Surtain, but he's still young enough to the point that the Broncos have a lot of almost culture building to do, considering the fact that it's been very messy for them the past couple years, ever since, of course, the Russell Wilson trade, but then even last year as well, with Sean Payton coming in, sort of coaxing him out of retirement by giving him this massive contract as well. The Broncos are expecting to be able to win under Sean Payton. To what extent that is definitely still to be determined, but they aren't hoping to just bottom out and be uncompetitive during this time, because Sean Payton, I'm sure, isn't trying to coach another 10 years. That they paid big for him, they want to get results, and they have a player that it's not like they're just investing into because they're desperate, because Pat Surtain is a very good value player and can continue to be somebody that they build around. And you look at the Broncos defense, and overall, it's a mostly underwhelming group. Zach Allen is a nice player on that front end. I like some of their linebackers, Alex Singleton being one of them, but overall, you look up and down the board, and there are not very many cornerstones whatsoever to build around outside of Pat Surtain. And if you let him walk, yeah, sure, you could probably get a good return in terms of assets, but then you just look like a totally barren team on that defensive side of the ball. And again, they're trying to manufacture their way into being at least competitive. I don't want to go contenders at this point, because I do think that the Broncos are still a ways away until they get to that point. Obviously, playing in the AFC West as well doesn't really do you any favors, because the Chiefs aren't expected to let up anytime soon. There's a lot of optimism as well about the Chargers now with Jim Harbaugh in town, that he should be able to, within the next, call it 2 years, I think 2 seasons is really just about the maximum amount of time it'll take for Harbaugh to really turn the Chargers around. Now, maybe I'm overly optimistic there, but the history of Harbaugh would show that typically when he arrives somewhere, it doesn't take all that long to be able to sort of transform it into a winner. So, I mean, the Chargers have the pieces. They have Harbaugh, they have Justin Herbert, and the Raiders, the Raiders are definitely a little bit more of a gray area in terms of what their exact path is. Pulling for Antonio Pierce, the interim coach that was hired full-time this past offseason. They have some good players. I'm very stuck up on the quarterback situation there, and they don't have their answer there yet. But that being said, they end up picking in the top 10 and getting a Shedeur Sanders or a Carson Beck, somebody that could be their long-term option. Who knows, really? So, again, it's not a star-studded division necessarily, but the fact that the Chiefs are in the way is a huge obstacle to overcome. So, again, the Broncos have a way to go here, but there's a lot of optimism about what Sean Payton can do with the offense this upcoming season, drafting Bo Nix 12th overall. A lot of NFL fans, I should say, aren't exactly sky high on Bo Nix, and there's reasons for that. The fact that, it really took him a long time to come into a positive quarterback at the college level, and now we're talking about, can he make that next jump to the NFL, where his arm strength or a little bit lack thereof could be a little bit more well documented, the speed of the game, all of the adjustments you have to make when taking that leap. That being said, quarterbacks, drafting them in the first round is just as much as a crapshoot as I mentioned earlier with cornerbacks on that second contract. So there's a lot of guessing games, of course, in the NFL, but ultimately, I think that their offense could be semi-productive this upcoming season, and it's going to be that defense that's really going to push them. Again, obviously, still a bit question mark with Bo Nix on the offense, so I'm not saying it's just the defense, especially because it's most areas of the defense that they need to really lock up. But I think Pat Surtain is a great start. If you want to be able to compete with the elite offenses and shut them down, the number one rule is you need somebody to match up against their number one and go rep for rep with them. And Pat Surtain is 100% a player that I think is capable of that. And again, cornerback is also such a weird position in terms of counting stats can be very deceptive with how they play, because if you're doing your job right as a cornerback, you're not going to have very many pass deflections or interceptions because they're not going to be throwing to you. So, if you look at the statistics for Surtain last season, I suppose it's a little bit down, but at the same time, not really something that I'm putting all too much stock into. I believe in the process. I believe in the film. Surtain has been a stud since he was with Alabama. He was worthy of a top 10 pick at the time, ended up going number 9 overall, and he has given the Broncos no reason to regret that decision up to this point. So, again, he gets to cash out, become the highest paid defensive back in NFL history. The Broncos get somebody that they can hope to continue building around on that side of the ball. And I think this is a win-win deal, especially considering the fact that the Broncos really don't have all that much money tied up into different players other than Russell Wilson, who isn't even on the team anymore. But you look at their overall payroll, they're in the bottom portion of the league, and they have money to spend. So why not go and get yourself an elite cornerback, lock them up for the future? Again, we know how these things work in terms of the progression of these contracts. They're only going to continue to get more expensive. For whatever it's worth as well, just about every team in the NFL could use a star young cornerback. So the hope, I'm sure, is for the Broncos to be able to, in the next couple of seasons, really find out what their identity is and start to make a push towards being one of those more competitive perennial playoff teams. But if that doesn't end up being the case, Surtain, I think, would be a great trade chip to have on the books, especially as these other contracts start to fly off as well, and he gets pushed down the list a little bit more. But again, I have no problem whatsoever with this move from the Broncos, and it's a lot of unknown with their future at this current moment. But again, with Sean Payton in the building, they are hoping to jumpstart themselves a little bit, and the fact that they have somebody the skill level of Pat Surtain to continue to build around, I think, is a huge positive. But definitely be sure to let us know how you feel in the comments section, as we are now going to dive into a couple other contracts that were announced yesterday. The holdout with 49ers offensive tackle Trent Williams has finally come to a close. It's been a very noisy offseason for the 49ers in regards to contract negotiations. So now that everybody seems to be on the same page, what can we expect out of the Super Bowl runner-ups from last season? And then additionally, the Pittsburgh Steelers decided to go out and spend on one of their veterans in Cameron Hayward. So we will break down the details of both of those contracts. But first, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to dive into some of the latest developments on the NFL contract front, as we are just over a day away from the beginning of the 2024 NFL season. A couple teams are trying to make these last-minute moves to get everyone on the same page, and that starts with the team that has been one of the most talked about during the entire offseason in the San Francisco 49ers, where, like I mentioned, it's been a noisy offseason for them, considering the fact that Brandon Ayuk, his status and with the team has been very much in the air for a number of months. He was publicly talking about how they don't want him and that he was looking for a trade. Ultimately, the Niners get a deal done with him, and then the last holdout for them was offensive tackle Trent Williams, who signs a 3-year, $82.6 million extension with the 49ers just yesterday. Trent Williams is 36 years old, so he is probably just cashing out one last time. He is entering his 15th NFL season, and while injuries have definitely been a bit of a red flag for him over the course of the past few seasons, he's been sort of in and out of the lineup, but he's been available for them in all of their playoff games, which is really the biggest thing. But since coming to San Francisco, in 2020, he has made the Pro Bowl in every year that he's played. The past 3 seasons, even at his older age, he has been all-pro first team at that tackle position. So somebody that has been invaluable to the 49ers and someone that as well, you talk about, when he did miss time, his absence was felt. As much as we talk about the Christian McCaffreys, the George Kittles, the Deebo Samuels, Trent Williams is just as valuable as the rest of them, and it flies under the radar. But additionally, if you sort of look big picture at this offense as well, there are other weapons that they can sort of plug and play when you have basically you have the best running back in the NFL in Christian McCaffrey, and then you have two borderline top 10 wide receivers with, I would argue, the best tight end in the league. That's definitely up for debate a little bit more. I would say indisputably has been one of the top 3 tight ends of the past handful of years in George Kittle. There are a lot of different weapons that Kyle Shanahan has been able to utilize, but there's no replacement for a Trent Williams when he's missing. And you talk as well about Brock Purdy and the fact that, a lot of people don't like to give him credit, considering the fact that he has been in such a loaded offense, which is definitely fair. And I am pro Brock Purdy. That being said, though, it's not like he has these outstanding physical characteristics that set him apart. Trent Williams being his blindside blocker is massively important because you basically don't have to worry about Brock Purdy I think he has relatively good pocket presence as it is, but it's almost just that much easier for him because with Trent Williams on your blind side, you never really have to worry. So Trent Williams gets his new deal. It is $48 million at signing and then a $25.69 million signing bonus. This adds a couple extra years. In 2021, he signed an extension with the 49ers after that first season. 6 years, $138.1 million. He was going to make just over $20 million this upcoming season, but the 49ers, they restructured the contract of defensive tackle Malik Collins to open up a little bit of extra cap space for this season as well. And Trent Williams ultimately gets this deal done, which I think is, like I talked about, massively important for the 49ers. And also just given the fact that for a Super Bowl runner-up that is running it back with the majority of the same roster. Yeah, you had some losses here and there along the margins, but all of your key playmakers are still available. They're even getting Talanoa Hufanga back this season, their former All-Pro safety that missed the second half of last year. Yeah, you're going to have to tread some water a little bit defensively, maybe with Dre Greenlaw recovering from his torn Achilles that he suffered in the Super Bowl. But again, this is, for the most part, the same team that is going to have yet another excellent chance to win the Super Bowl this upcoming season. I thought it was a little bit unfortunate for their sake, the fact that they were sort of juggling all of these different contract negotiations during this year, while also keeping in the back of their mind that Brock Purdy is making not even $1 million, and that is unheard of from getting that level of production from a quarterback at that cheap of a price. Basically, one of the best contracts of all time. I don't think that that's hyperbole. Now, come at me in the comment section if you disagree there, but again, just the fact that he's been able to lead them to back-to-back NFC championship games. He's been extremely reliable in just about every game that he has played in, especially during the regular season. I don't know how you could argue. Again, I'm not saying he's the best quarterback of all time by any means, but talk about getting somebody with the last pick in the draft and him actually turning into a positive for your team. That's just about unheard of. So, again, a great deal there, but that being said, that's going to come to an end, and Brock Purdy is going to be eligible for a new contract extension after this season. So again, did not envy the situation that general manager John Lynch had to navigate this offseason financially, but here they are. Now everybody's back. Now it's time to lock in and try and avenge not just last year's Super Bowl loss a couple of years ago as well. This is a team that's been knocking on the door for a number of years, and they feel like that this is a great chance for them to finally be able to bring it home. So that's where we're at on the 49ers at this point. Another deal that was announced yesterday was Cameron Hayward signing a new extension with the Steelers. 3 years, $54 million extension, ultimately grants him $29 million more on this deal, this restructured deal, in comparison to what he was going to make. Was a bit of a surprising move to me, considering the fact that Cameron Hayward talked about the idea of contemplating retirement at the end of the season. Cameron Hayward has been a leader for this Pittsburgh Steelers team for a number of years, and he has seen at least somewhat of a drop-off in terms of production, but still a very positive player for them and a crucial leader for this defense that has been among the best units in the NFL these past couple years. So I do believe that Hayward, again, a little bit of a surprise here, but they have some good money. We just talked about the sort of bargain at quarterback that the 49ers have in Brock Purdy. The Steelers ultimately, now I think that Brock Purdy is significantly better than anything that Pittsburgh has right now. That's at least my own opinion there. But I mean, they're not paying very much at the quarterback position at all, between a quarterback on a rookie contract in Justin Fields and getting Russell Wilson for a veteran minimum. So, they sort of have the money to spend. And again, ultimately, Cameron Hayward, it's more about what he stands for, I think, than the overall level of production. We've seen a number of some of these other players really step in and take on a bigger role for the defense in Pittsburgh. TJ Watt is the obvious name that he's been an elite player since they drafted him a handful of years ago, but they have other guys too that continue to develop for them. And ultimately, this is still a good defense. Cameron Hayward is still a positive player for them, and somebody that, again, with a Steelers team that has been treading water a little bit these past few years in terms of being kind of in mediocrity, haven't won a playoff game since 2016. You have somebody in the building, along with Mike Tomlin, of course, but, on the roster that has seen good playoff runs in the past and knows what it takes to win. So, ultimately, again, we're talking about a guy that he is headed into, at this point, drafted in 2011, so, quick math here, year 13, something along those lines. Multiple All-Pro appearances throughout his career, and somebody that, you think that you can definitely rely on from a leadership standpoint. But I think it's a good move here. We do have a comment here from Anthony Manzano. When you say Patrick Surtain Jr. broke the record for the highest paid corner, is it per year average or the overall contract? So I know for a fact the per year average is now the record, because the average annual value on Surtain's deal is $24 million per year. The previous record was Jair Alexander of the Green Bay Packers, who was at $21 million, and I believe the total of it was $96 million is the most ever. But if that's not the case, definitely be sure to let me know in the comments section. But I am pretty sure that it is the overall contract highest paid ever for a defensive back. So, as we're sort of diving into the Surtain deal as well, I feel like got most of the thoughts there out on Hayward. Again, he's not the same player that he was even a couple years ago. Last year, he saw a drastic drop-off from 10.5 sacks to 2 sacks. He was available in less games, just 11 last year, dealing with some injuries as well. It was, not an excellent season. So again, I can't say that this was a no-brainer deal by any means, but I also do understand just the idea of bringing your veteran leader back and having that type of player in the locker room. But, outside of that as well, we will hit on one last very quick note in terms of contract extensions, in the fact that the Washington Commanders, this news just broke, double check here, a couple hours ago, that the Washington Commanders are signing offensive guard Sam Cosmi to a 4-year contract extension as well to try and, secure that offensive line in front of Jaden Daniels for the next handful of years. Cosmi has been a positive player for them. They took him in the second round of 2021, and ultimately, again, it's just about protecting the future. And right now, the future is Jaden Daniels for the Washington Commanders. So I think that this is a positive move. Now, you let me know what your thoughts are on any of these contract extensions, but we are now going to take a quick break following. Actually, we have time for one more comment here from Anthony Manzano. Surtain has the highest, then it's Alexander, then it's Terrell, then it is Ward and Ramsey. So yeah, I think that makes sense. And again, the other part of it too is that Surtain is still just 24 years old. So you're paying him, yes, a lot of money, but $24 million for a cornerback, we'll see in terms of, I'm curious how the market continues to develop for cornerbacks and defensive backs in general, considering the fact that, all of football, it all moves together even with the separate pieces. Wide receivers and quarterbacks are now, some of the highest paid players in the NFL. Outside of that, it's defensive ends. What do? Rush the opposing team's quarterback. And then corners obviously are massively important because they need to shut down opposing wide receivers and opposing quarterbacks as well. And we have a comment here from Joe who said as well, the Pats got a pretty good value with a certain quarterback in the 2000s. Very fair point there. Getting Tom Brady at a 6th round pick is also incredible value as well. And Anthony points out as well, offensive tackle, absolutely. It's just the direction this game is headed in is on the offensive side of the ball, airing it out. All of those positions that sort of impact that as well are where the money is going to go over the course of these next handful of years. So tackle is a great call there as well. Cornerback is sort of, again, one of those positions as well that NFL teams are going to need to, secure in order to keep up with the massive, exponential growth of the wide receiver position in the NFL to try and keep up with those stellar athletes. But again, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. We are going to move on here to some comments that were recently made from Houston Texans wide receiver Stephon Diggs, who has, I wouldn't say been a controversial figure, but he's been one of the best wide receivers in the NFL and has also been one of the loudest wide receivers in terms of voicing his displeasure with certain things. So we're going to talk about that and what the upcoming season for Stephon Diggs looks like. But first, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are going to now dive into the conversation surrounding Houston Texans wide receiver Stephon Diggs, who has been obviously one of the more prominent figures in the NFL as of these past few years. given his time in Minnesota, where he emerged onto the scene. The Minnesota Miracle, of course, is probably his most signature play of his career, but we've now seen in the past few seasons him force his way out of a couple different situations that have been ultimately, I'm not going to argue that the Viking situation with Kirk Cousins was incredible, but overall it was pretty stable, all things considered, and he just had one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in Josh Allen throwing to him, and it seemed like for a lot of those years he was sort of hinting at his displeasure, and I'm really not sure what it was, because he was one of the most targeted wide receivers in the NFL for a couple seasons, and I thought that they went out of their way almost to some degree as well to try and give him those looks, and ultimately something behind the scenes, he talked about in an interview with GQ Sports that he just appeared on. The article came out on Tuesday afternoon, I believe it was, and he talked about the idea that, in order for him to accomplish his goals, he felt like he needed a change of scenery, which is totally fair. If you are anybody, and this goes beyond sports as well, of course, you have to sort of put yourself in the best position, and be a little bit selfish in terms of where you position yourself for your future, which is totally fair. But Diggs has been, I don't want to say obnoxious about it, but he's been definitely very vocal and a little bit cocky about it as well. And that's totally fine, because honestly, if you're a wide receiver in the NFL, there are just certain positions that you have to have a little bit of arrogance to you. So it's not even like I dislike Stephon Diggs. And if I say that he's cocky, that's not an insult to me. You just have to have that edge a little bit. But to the comment that Anthony Manzano is saying in the comment section right now, there were rumors that apparently he was getting frustrated with Josh Allen not showing up in the playoffs against Kansas City. Not sure if that's BS or if it's actually true. I think that game, though, and that was at this point 2021, is sort of when we started to see a little bit, or 2022, I don't know, whichever playoff year, the year where Diggs took the picture. It was the 2021 AFC Championship game, I think, where he took the picture of the confetti coming down. It'll hit. I think that ultimately that's where we started to see a little bit of frustration from Diggs, and there was a lot of noise headed into last season during the offseason about Diggs and Josh Allen not being on the same page. I think that ultimately, I think it would be unfair of him to specifically say Josh Allen isn't showing up enough. I know that he has had moments where specifically I more so look at that playoff game against the Bengals, and that one was 2021. I have my years all mixed up right now, but I think that was the one where I was maybe more disappointed in him. During that AFC Championship game against the Chiefs, 13 seconds. Like, that's when Josh Allen ended up throwing the game-tying touchdown, and the defense is the one who let it down. But Anthony's comment here, as a football fan, I'm not sure what the difference between arrogance and cockiness is. I've always thought they're the same thing. They're along the lines the same thing. I think it's just a little bit of like some of those words just have a bad connotation to them, but I think ultimately it's just about having attitude, which is another word that can be used in a negative light. But if you're a wide receiver, and really if you're a professional athlete in general, you kind of have to be arrogant and believe that you're the best. And I think where it gets for me with Diggs is when it turns into toxicity a little bit and turning on his teams. And as much as, again, I can defend the attitude and stuff like that, Diggs, even in this interview with GQ Sports, he said, quote, "None of those teams wanted to get rid of me," where, it sounds like being the general manager of the Bills was not necessarily in line with that he was definitely, wanting to move on from Diggs this past offseason. Again, Diggs has an edge to him, and that's totally fine. I don't love doing the cross-sports comparisons, but Stephon Diggs' career up to this point has been a little bit, a little bit similar to me as a Jimmy Butler in the NBA. And again, I won't harp on this too long because those cross-sports comparisons can be a little bit messy. But Jimmy Butler is another athlete in American sports that the talent is undeniable, and he has sort of blown up on his teams at times for them not carrying their weight, which is something that, even all of the greats do that to some degree, is, demand excellence out of their teammates as well. And ultimately, Jimmy Butler's career for a while was seeming like he's the problem. The term locker room cancer was being thrown around towards Jimmy Butler, but ultimately kind of seems like he happened to be right in at least some of those instances. And ultimately, once he got to the Heat, where there was that culture and that work ethic, he was ultimately able to fully thrive and have a lot of success. People want to tear down Jimmy Butler, but 2 finals appearances for a Heat team that ultimately, they had their good years without a doubt, but it's not like they were ever world beaters, but they were able to, put together very impressive playoff runs during Jimmy Butler's tenure there in Miami. And I think that there's a little bit of a spinoff to that with Stephon Diggs, where he wasn't happy in Minnesota towards the end there. He was not showing up to meetings, getting fined by the team, and ultimately was, tweeting out about, quote, something needs to change, I think was the exact quote that he had. And ultimately, Diggs, it's a fine way to go about business for yourself in the NFL as long as you can continue to sort of cash the checks you write. But fans are going to be rubbed the wrong way occasionally because of moves like that Diggs has created. And ultimately, what he showed in this GQ interview is that he really doesn't care whatsoever. He said, "I love the noise. I'm a person that enjoys being doubted. I enjoy proving people wrong," which is absolutely fair. I don't know how many people really doubt Stephon Diggs as a wide receiver talent. I don't think that that's ever really been the conversation. I think it more is about the locker room. And, when he adds to that the idea of leaving from Minnesota and Buffalo, he said things had to shake because I kind of wanted them to shake. And that's fair. Again, if you are a person in a work environment that you don't feel like can meet your personal needs, do what you got to do. But, he's obviously been very public about it all, which does sort of give him that diva label to some degree, especially playing wide receiver as well, that he is definitely not the only wide receiver we've seen in recent history that has been a little bit picky about his destinations. Just ask Antonio Brown, and his targets as well. Obviously, all of those things sort of are rolled up into one here, but I think that Diggs, when you go back to the attitude conversation, as Anthony also adds, Terrell Owens is another excellent example of that. You can go through. There's just, it's kind of how it is. You have these players, and I think that especially in a position as well, like wide receiver, where you only have a certain amount of opportunities, all these other things have to break right for you. And then when you aren't getting the looks, even though you are getting open, or at least, Diggs is probably always thinks that he's open, but when you aren't able to cash out on those opportunities, it's a very frustrating process. But we're talking about attitude and such. Anthony in the comment section says, I'm going to use 3 players at the quarterback position that applied to what we're talking about with the confidence but not cocky or arrogant. Drew Brees, Tom Brady, and Peyton Manning. I would even argue, Tom Brady was a little bit cocky as well. I think that ultimately it's finding that balance of you can view the world of yourself personally. It's just a matter of when you take it out on teammates. And that's where Diggs loses me a little bit with this whole situation with the Bills, because and the stats do not back up what I'm about to say. This is an eye test thing. I've gone through it trying to find the numbers that would support that the Bills were actually better in the second half of last season when they stopped trying to force feed Diggs. Ultimately, Josh Allen's numbers went down and the team's overall points per game went down. So, I again, for whatever it's worth, I thought that the Bills did look better when they weren't trying to force feed Diggs, and ultimately that obviously does not bode well for the relationship that already seemed to be a little bit shaky at the start anyways, headed into the season. So now Diggs heads to Houston, and he has sort of a lot to prove to everybody to some degree. Again, it's not about him being a good talent, because we are a great talent, because we know that already. It's more so about the idea of, can you keep a cool head and help contribute to a winning organization? And this is a Texans team that is up and coming. They're very young across the board. He's going to go in as the veteran with that team. And the attitude that he has is going to be exceptionally important for him. And sort of one other wide receiver comparison I'll make is Devontae Adams last year. After a win against the Patriots, he talked about his frustration, and he said that his legacy isn't measured in wins and losses, it's measured by greatness, which is definitely an arrogant thing to say. But at the same time, after watching, at least personally, watching the Receiver show that was just released on Netflix, I kind of understood his point of view by the end of it, talking about it's about the process. If the offense looks terrible and you're a wide receiver not getting your targets, you're going to be frustrated. When you're not getting your targets, but you are winning and you are having a positive impact, it's a lot easier to stomach the fact that you don't have all of the counting stats along with it. The issue for Diggs is he kind of did have the counting stats, and the Bills weren't winning games because of it. And they started winning games more when they did start to look elsewhere. But again, I think ultimately Diggs, this is probably a one-year stint in Houston where he is going to stop by. I don't think that they're going to have the money to pay him long-term, given that they have so many young players that eventually they're going to have to cash out on. So I'm very curious to see, what this upcoming season looks like for Diggs in a new role with a new team and different expectations, where he's also not the only wide receiver like he was in Buffalo, where there really wasn't that much supplemental talent. Now there are a bunch of mouths to feed in Nico Collins, and you have Tank Dell, who had an excellent rookie season before getting hurt. Dalton Schultz, they just signed to a contract extension. So how is Diggs going to respond to the criticism that surrounded him in the past handful of months? I guess we'll have to see. But again, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We are now going to be switching gears here and going from the actual field itself. I want to share some thoughts that I have from the Chicago Bears Hard Knocks season that just saw its finale come to a close last night. So we'll talk about what I saw from Hard Knocks in general and my takeaways as a whole. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be diving into the overall takeaways from this season of Hard Knocks that followed the Chicago Bears. For those of you who aren't aware, Hard Knocks is an HBO docuseries that they do every year following an NFL training camp, and this year they did the Chicago Bears, which is a team that definitely has a lot to prove this upcoming season. And ultimately, I think that the biggest thing I got out of this, because you only get so much of the actual football reps or anything like that, I think the big thing is I was already growing on the infrastructure of Chicago. Now, if you asked me this a year ago, I would have been a little bit more skeptical, specifically with general manager Ryan Poles, as to whether or not he is doing a great job. I think that he's made a lot of moves, and he's taken risks, which is a good thing, but we also saw a pretty disastrous trade of giving up what ended up being, I believe it was the first overall pick of the second round in 2023. And ultimately, they traded that for Chase Claypool, who just never panned out in Chicago. So Poles has had his hits, but he's definitely had his misses as well. And he's been aggressive, which is a positive. But at some point, if you're being aggressive multiple times and you're missing, you're just losing. So, I'm not saying that it's been the utmost confidence always for me with Chicago, but I've been a fan of Matt Eberflus since he was hired. Maybe I'm naive about it, but I do sort of get something out of the idea of the reports with Eberflus is that he connected with the team really well. That, again, this is such a cliche storyline that I've sort of latched onto, but this idea that he walks into meetings and doesn't have a list of notes that he's just reading off of. He goes in empty-handed and just speaks from the heart and tries to connect with his team. And again, I know that when we're talking about football, it's all about, toughness and everything like that. But I do feel like in order to be a successful head coach, you have to be able to have some level of relatability to your players. I thought at the end of Bill Belichick's tenure in New England, there was a very clear divide between him and the players. And maybe it's just this whole new age of the NFL with this younger generation that, not coddled, but the idea of connecting a little bit more. But not just the fact that he is, a nice guy or anything like that. I do think he actually knows his stuff when it comes to defense as well. That is his background. And last year especially, where I started to, because, Eberflus's job, I think, was a little bit on the hot seat last season, but the fact that they closed the season the way that they did with their defense playing like a top 10 group after, it had taken a while to really see a lot of these key defensive players shine. And that's one of the other things that I think that Hard Knocks showed as well, was it kind of put people on it more so to some of the key players on defense, because headed into last season, I definitely was unsure about a lot of their defensive pieces, and you start to see the likes of, I think the biggest one that people sort of came away from training camp with, or Hard Knocks with, was Jalen Johnson, who had just signed a contract extension earlier in the offseason and had played like one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL for a little bit. So it was less so that, but then you start to see other names that I think are important to keep in mind. That secondary, you have Jaquan Brisker, hard-hitting safety. Kyler Gordon is more of a nickelback, but again, he can lay the stick and is also pretty good in coverage. Tyreek Stevenson ended up having a really good rookie season for them. So ultimately, this is a Bears defense that was taking a little bit of time to develop, but they add also the likes of a TJ Edwards and a Tremaine Edmonds over the past couple years. They make the trade for Montez Sweat at the trade deadline last season. And again, from that point on, Sweat produced and the defense produced as a whole, to the point where you can see sort of the direction this team is heading in, and that it's not a complete dumpster fire. And now you add on top of that the selection of Caleb Williams, who you can only get so much in terms of the actual football analysis out of a docuseries like this, but I think that, it was really cool. It was in the first episode, I believe it was, where They saw Caleb Williams throw an interception in a scrimmage, go over to talk to offensive coordinator Shane Waldron about the mistake that he just made, and then a couple minutes later, they basically dialed up the same exact play, and it ended up in a touchdown. And just that idea that he's communicating with this organization, that they are trying to do the best that they can after a lot of people have very much criticized the Bears for sort of butchering the Justin Fields tenure after taking him in 2021, and really they did not do a good job of surrounding him with talent and giving him a situation that he could succeed in. But now I think that with Caleb Williams, they are doing everything that they can to try and just show him how to grow as a player. They know that he is an elite talent, but ultimately this is a situation where he is stepping in and he has massive expectations on his shoulders, being the number 1 overall pick, being one of the most highly touted quarterback prospects in recent history, to the point where I think that ultimately, this is a situation where I am buying into the long-term infrastructure of the Bears. And that's not something that I would have expected to be saying a couple years ago. But I feel like they're at this point now where this is a little bit of a make-or-break season to some degree as well, considering the fact that Matt Eberflus does sort of have his job on the line. They desperately need the quarterback's position to pan out for them. They've had multiple number 1 overall picks over the past couple years, and they decided to pass up on not just Bryce Young, who ended up going number 1 overall in 2023, but also CJ Stroud, who had one of the most impressive rookie quarterback seasons that we've seen in recent history, maybe in NFL history altogether. So I do feel like this is a situation where I can feel good about the process right now, but there is also still a lot of proving to be done from the Bears organization this upcoming season. And ultimately, him and Ryan Poles, they need this to work out for them. And I have confidence in that. And it was kind of funny seeing as well, a lot of the internet made a big deal about it, especially because it's the Giants of all teams. But Joe Shane, their general manager, there was a clip towards the end of last night's episode where they were both at the Clemson-Georgia game from this past weekend scouting, and Joe Shane said to him, it must be nice not having to evaluate that quarterback position anymore, which obviously with the Giants, with Daniel Jones, with how much of a storyline that it obviously is, the internet ran with that a little bit. But I mean, it's true. It's just about sort of putting the surrounding pieces outside of him to make sure that they are set for the upcoming future. So ultimately, again, I'm buying into the stock of what I already was sort of leaning with the Bears are in the right track. And now that they have ideally the quarterback in position, I do think that they have the coach. Again, Ryan Poles, he's made some bad moves in the past, but when you talk about just the personal connections that Eberflus and Poles were able to demonstrate during this season's series of it, I think that it is the right way to operate under, the sort of new times with where we are at in the world and, with this next generation of athletes that's coming up right now. I believe in the future. I believe in the infrastructure, and the Bears are going to be a team that is going to be vying for a playoff spot this upcoming season. I would say, generally speaking, there are 2 things that are really, up in the air a little bit. It's the idea of, can Shane Waldron be a good offensive coordinator? I'm curious to see how this pans out for him. He spent the past 3 years in Seattle as their offensive coordinator. Ultimately, it was a mixed bag. It was pretty middle of the pack in 2022. The Seahawks were, widely speaking here, statistically, a top 10 offense in the league. That being said, I'm also a big fan of Dave Canales, who was with the Seahawks as the passing game coordinator that year. He moved on to the Buccaneers in 2023, and the offense took a step back. Now, it's not like the Seahawks. They have their receivers, absolutely, and I do think that they have good running backs, but it's not like it's the most talented offense in the world anyways, with Geno Smith and some question marks on the offensive line. But I'm curious about Shane Waldron. I'm curious about the offensive line, where a lot of people are sort of burying the Bears because of the offensive line, saying that they aren't going to be able to hold up. It's actually a pretty decent offensive line. It's not going to be top tier. It's not going to be, among the elites of the world, but they should be able to give Caleb Williams sufficient time to operate, and ultimately, sure, there are questions about Caleb Williams, but, I think we just have to see how that plays out. I am a believer in him personally. I know there are people who aren't either, so it's not like you can just shoo him in to be a success in the NFL, but they at least have a temporary answer at that position. These next couple years are going to be about continuing to build on the culture that they've established these past couple years and seeing what they have in Caleb Williams, because it's not often where you get to sort of parlay one first-round quarterback directly into another first-round quarterback and actually be in a better position than you were previously. So, again, I'm buying stock in the Bears long-term, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We are going to finish off the show today by switching gears a little bit to college football, where yesterday we got the new AP poll rankings, and we're going to be diving into that. But first, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be reacting to the new AP polls that just dropped yesterday. We were actually, I think, live when they officially dropped, so I was trying to navigate both talking about what the upcoming week is going to look like, while also a little bit giving my thoughts. But now that I've had a good 24 hours to sit on it, I have some takeaways. So first, we will start with some of the biggest risers from last week to this week. You are looking at USC, which was significantly the highest riser, up 10 spots from number 23 to number 13, and then Miami up 7 spots from 17 to 12. Now, these are the two teams that significantly had the biggest wins in week one, and I think that it is fair. It is interesting that Miami and USC are sort of neck and neck here. Now, that being said, LSU is a significantly better team than Florida, but for USC to move up 10 spots and Miami to move up 7, as much as, yes, I would definitely agree that, it's a better win for USC without a doubt, Miami, they also made Florida look a lot worse than they actually are. And to be able to pull off that win on the road in Gainesville, I think that was very impressive. And, it is a question, should they be a top 10 team? Now, Obviously, it's the beginning of the college football season, so it is basically overreaction season to everything that we've seen the first couple weeks. So I don't want to, get ahead of myself here with Miami. It is just a little bit more of a fact that I was a believer in Miami headed into the season, and with how dominant they looked, I feel like there was a good case for them to maybe move up a little bit higher. Now, right in front of them, again, Miami at number 12. You're looking at Utah at 11, Michigan at 10, Missouri at 9. I mean, I don't know definitively how many teams I would take Miami over. I would probably take them over Michigan and Utah. I think that number 10 spot is probably where I would have slotted Miami into. But again, I don't typically hate not erring on the overreactionary side of things, but I think Miami is going to be a top 10 team in the country this year. And I understand you don't want to panic over one win against an unranked team necessarily when looking at the rankings that way. But I think it was just maybe that I am reaffirming myself a little bit too much here after what was a dominant win against Florida. USC, great win against LSU. I do feel like LSU beat themselves a little bit with their offensive approach. We talked about this on Monday, the fact that they were erring more so on the airing it outside and using the passing game, which is totally fair because you have Garrett Nussmeier, who is an up-and-coming quarterback. I thought he made just about every throw. Sure, there were plays that was a little bit inaccurate, but for his second career start, that was an excellent performance. If they ran the ball more against USC, I feel like we could have potentially seen a different result. Their drives just kept stalling in the air, and it's because they would go to the deeper intermediate passing game on second down when they were having pretty good success running the ball. So USC, they're going to be a good team. Super encouraged by what I saw from the defense. But that being said, I feel like if LSU comes into that game with a different approach from an offensive perspective, we could have seen a different result, in which case USC would have been nowhere close to jumping up 10 spots. But that's just my thoughts. A lot of the teams that they passed anyways, it's not like they played in all too high stakes of games anyways. You got, obviously, Tennessee playing Chattanooga. You have Oklahoma playing Temple. So I kind of get it, but I feel like that was maybe a little bit of an overreaction, USC all the way up to 13. But they're going to have an outside shot at the playoffs, definitely. They're in that bubble, so I also can't say that I'm firmly against it either. Biggest fallers here, of course, Florida State came into the season ranked number 10. They are no longer ranked, did not even receive a single vote, which is the right call, in my opinion, based off of how they looked in these first 2 weeks. I was kind of surprised that they didn't get a single vote. Again, not that I would have personally voted for them anyways, but, just this idea that they could fall so far so quick is a little bit crazy to me. Also, for whatever it's worth, I don't know. Colorado got a vote. I don't even know. I don't want to take a subliminal shot there at Colorado. That's unnecessary and opens a whole different debate there. But Florida State, obviously the biggest faller. Clemson down 11 spots following their loss to Georgia, down from number 14 to 25. The reality is, they could have... Losing to Georgia is not a real blemish on your resume. It's how they lost. So I get it. The coaches poll, interestingly enough, they were a little bit more conservative. They were down to number 22. So not quite as drastic of a drop off there, but Clemson's a team that is going to have to reestablish themselves among the best teams in the country because that is not the type of program that realistically they've been over the course of these past handful of years. So I definitely understand the lack of confidence that exists right now with Clemson. Am I writing them off for dead? Certainly not, but I do definitely understand the concerns there as well. LSU down 5 spots because of that loss to USC, so they now sit at number 18. I think LSU is a team that can definitely rebound from this loss. I know that a lot of people are really concerned about it. I think they played a really good game, all things considered. The biggest concern I have with LSU at this point, we talked about it as well on Monday, is the fact that when the game came down to getting a defensive stop to, survive in advance, their secondary was Swiss cheese. And, credit as well to USC's offense. Miller Moss was also excellent in that game, so it's not like it's a one-way road here. That USC did earn that win, but number one concern about LSU this upcoming season was about their secondary, in my opinion, and they got torched a little bit in this game. So that I think that them falling like they did is very understandable, but LSU definitely a team that I think could reinsert themselves into playoff bubble contention as well. I'd say they're in that ish bubble right now, but it's also week 2, so there's no need to get too into the college football playoff discussion right now. And then Oregon down 4 spots from number 3 to number 7. I didn't love the fact that they dropped as much as they did. I understand not a very convincing win against Idaho. There were some real red flags, especially when you are talking about the offensive line that allowed more than half of the sacks total that were allowed for Oregon in all of 2023. 3 sacks allowed versus Idaho. They only allowed 5 in all of the 2023 season. So that's definitely a bit of a red flag in the fact that it wasn't just the pass game, the run game as well. They ultimately weren't able to get all that much going. Wasn't terrible numbers, 14 handoffs and 67 yards. Not bad. Against Idaho, though, you do sort of hope for better results than that. Sounds like, people are talking about the injuries on that Oregon offensive line. It sounds like Matthew Bedford, their projected starter, Dan Lanning is optimistic about him returning this week for Boise State. I mentioned that Boise State game yesterday. The fact that the spread, at least, when I checked yesterday, was 19.5 points. And Boise State is capable of keeping it closer because they have a good offense led by, of course, Ashton Jeanty. But at the same time, their defense got run over by Georgia Southern. And this is a situation where if there were ever a bounce back spot, and I also have the utmost faith in Dan Lanning to be able to sell to his team urgency and the need to win. I think that he's very capable of that. You can dislike the 4th down conversion or the fourth down attempts in general, but I think he's a motivator. He's the Dan Campbell of the college football game. They both sort of definitely roll the dice a lot of the time, but I think that they're incredible motivators. I think Oregon is going to, go in and move people around, or at least that's the hope. And if they don't, then I'm going to start to be concerned. But again, 4 spots dropped in a loss. I don't love that necessarily, especially dropping them behind Ole Miss. Ole Miss was dominant in their game against Furman. It's also against Furman. And I don't know. Ole Miss, maybe I'm just not putting enough respect on their name. It's not that I don't think that they are worthy of being a top 10 team or anything like that. It's just I'm not selling my stock on Oregon because of this win. Because of a win is what we're talking about here, that it wasn't convincing enough. I sort of understand. I mean, Michigan got docked one spot down. I thought that was a lot more fair than Oregon. I could have seen a little bit of movement there. Bama had a dominant win. Texas had a dominant win. Notre Dame had, I wouldn't say a dominant win by any means, but a crucial win over Texas A&M that ultimately, it's a good win. So I can understand a little bit of wiggle room, but Oregon down to 7, ultimately, I think they're going to find their way back up there like nothing. But couple new additions to the group as well. Georgia Tech, now 2-0. Obviously, the win against Florida State is really what this is about because there wasn't a poll that came out after that win against Florida State. So Yellow Jackets now 2-0. So they find themselves in the mix after a win over the weekend against, it was Georgia State, I believe. So, they're 2-0. And then Louisville as well, a team that a lot of people were sort of ready to turn the page on this upcoming season. And they are now in the picture because you're looking at A&M and Florida State falling out opens up a little bit of wiggle room there. Interesting to note that in the coaches poll, it's not Georgia Tech that ended up making it into the top 25. It was Washington, a team that, again, just like Louisville, a lot of people, since they lost a number of key personnel members, even worse for Washington was losing Kalen DeBoer, of course, their head coach from last season, but they are sort of hanging in there, at least with votes. By the way, shout out Boston College for receiving 49 votes as well into the top 25. I'm from Massachusetts. I don't think I've ever seen a number next to Boston College's name, and I don't anticipate that that's going to be the case. They play Duquesne this upcoming week, and then they're going to play Missouri in Missouri. So, if they pull off a miracle win there, then the Bill O'Brien effect is in full effect, but that's not really how I see this going down. But let me know what your thoughts were, what your takeaways were from the new AP polls being released. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to catch us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, NFL game day tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We'll be bringing you some fantasy implications and picks as well for that. So you will not want to miss out there. Again, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.